why I'm speaking about this subject. I'm from a small island, Malta, and I've been doing security research when it comes to voice over IP. Not just voice over IP, but when it comes to voice over IP, I've published tools, both open source and commercial tools, some of which you can freely use and download to test your PBX servers for security issues. And yeah, VoIPscanner.com is an SaaS scanner, so it's a security tool that is very simple to use. The other tools are command line based. And I'm sometimes going by the name of Enable Security, and Subvicious is a tool that I've published. So what is this about? Well, I'll be talking about security issues related to voice over IP, especially SIP, and especially systems out there based on asterisk in this case. Because when it comes to SIP, the SIP RFC is quite large. Some things are defined, some things are not necessarily defined in too much detail in the SIP RFC. It's a large, it's got almost 300 pages. And when you have a standard that large, you're going to have some security holes, which might be considered as somewhat features sometimes. So I will be introducing those. And apart from that, most PBX systems out there will also do other things other than SIP. So they will do TFTP, they will have multiple web applications, all of which increase the exposure of your PBX or voice over IP or unified communication system. So let's look at some protocol-specific issues quickly. So SIP, most of it goes on UDP. Most of it is not encrypted. So everyone probably knows that if you don't have any encryption, if you use SIP on your mobile phone, I was checking out what sort of traffic is here on the Wi-Fi, and you notice people using SIP on Wi-Fi, which means that anyone can view this traffic and maybe gain access to the PBX server. Same thing with IAX2. I'm not going to talk about that too much here. So that's a well-known security issue, but there are other security issues that are being exploited all the time nowadays. And I'm going to talk about user enumeration and peer-to-peer SIP security issues. Let's look at user enumeration. So you have different responses in SIP, just like HTTP. You have methods. In HTTP, you would have post and get. In SIP, you would have register, for example. And this allows you to register your phone, right? So if it returns a different response when an extension does not exist, if you try to specify the extension as an attacker, then you can guess which extensions exist on a PBX and which extensions do not exist. And if it returns to 100, then it means no password is set, you're authenticated. If it returns 401, then it means you have to provide some sort of password, and then there's a challenge response mechanism. And if it returns 404, usually it means the user is not found in the configuration. And this is a feature of the SIP RFC. It defines this. So let's look at a quick demo which shows how this works. So I made a small Python script. And when the extension does not exist, the response is 404. In this case, the extension 100 has no password set. So you get to 100 and 401 in the case of one extension 101, which has a password set. And these things can be automated very easily. If you use tools out there, Subvicious has VWAR, which does this very quickly. It can go through thousands of extensions in a few minutes because it's over UDP, because it's very easy to scan for such extensions. And attackers are doing this, and I will talk about what attackers are doing in the wild soon. So that's a feature, and to protect against this, the Asterisk and other PBX vendors had to actually break the RFC. They had to change the default behavior to not correspond with the standard RFC to prevent this sort of thing from happening. Then you have peer-to-peer SIP, which is quite interesting. There are many cases where you don't necessarily need to pass through a proxy, a SIP proxy, a PBX, to make a phone call. And this introduces some interesting scenarios. I wanted to show you how easy it is to spoof caller ID in this case. It's very straightforward. You just configure your SIP client and specify any name, okay? In this case, I specified a well-known name, and the Cisco phone configured to use SIP in this case shows you the name George Bush in this case. But people are sometimes astonished when they see this, but that's like a feature, right? So this is more interesting and more technically interesting. This is an attack which I like to call SIP digest leak. When you have two phones communicating between each other, one phone sending an invite, starting a phone call, and the other phone gets picked up, so someone else picks up the phone call. It sends an invite, and the victim phone, I'm going to call it the victim phone, the mobile phone over here, sends a 200 OK when it picks it up. And normally, the the red phone, the attacker phone, sends, if it receives a buy, it would acknowledge that buy, which means that the other phone hanged up. But what happens when the attacker phone sends a 407 challenge? If there's no PBX in between, what happens is that the victim phone sends a challenge response to the attacker phone. And what this means is that the attacker phone can then grab the challenge response, which is a sort of digest MD5 mechanism, and perform a very quick brute force attack, password cracking attack on the computer, that is, on the hacker's computer. And I wanted to show you a demo of how I've automated this attack. So this is one of my tools, VoIPack. It's part of VoIPack, which allows you to pull off this trick. So I'm calling my Xlite, and as soon as I get the phone call, Xlite hangs up for me immediately, and the attacker tool gets the password very quickly. It gets the password because, as you can see below, there's the challenge response. There's those hexadecimal numbers are actually the MD5 based on the digest authentication mechanism. And then it launches John the Ripper, which is a very well-known tool, to automatically crack the password from this sort of MD5 hash. It actually then gets the password by launching this brute force attack. And it can run, once it has the hash, it can run password attacks, which are very, very fast. We're talking about thousands and tens of thousands of passwords per second. And yeah, if you have phones being exposed on the internet or in a location where there are attackers, then they probably are vulnerable to this attack, like around 60% according to my tests of the phones hardware phones and software phones are vulnerable to this, because it seems that the SIP RFC did not really define the behavior, how phones should behave when they receive such a message. But it's not only about SIP. There's also distributions like Trixbox, Elastix, and all the rest, which come with a lot of features. And for example, Trixbox comes with a lot of default passwords. If you install Trixbox, you have to change all those passwords, especially if it's exposed on the internet. But even if not, it's a very good idea to change the passwords. And you have, even Elastix, it has even more passwords. These are defaults. So you have to go on each service which has some sort of authentication and probably change the password. Otherwise, one day or another, you're going to have security problems. And I wanted to show how having different web applications on, interacting with the PBX might actually expose your PBX to attackers. Like in this case, I installed vTiger CRM on Elastix some time ago. It's been a while. And vTiger CRM had a security vulnerability. It's usually called local file inclusion security vulnerability, which allows you to include a PHP script from the disk, from the hard disk of the server. So I'm going to specify etc passwd to show that I can include any file. Now, etc passwd doesn't have PHP code in it, but we can see the contents of the file. But I just wanted to also show that one could run code in this case, and how an attacker might inject this code through SIP, for example. So we can read the asterisk log file. We can also write to the asterisk log file. And that's pretty interesting. In Subvicious, I'm not sure if you can see what's happening over there. I cannot. But in Subvicious, you can specify the name in SV map. So as the name in the SIP message, I specified some PHP code. And if we go back to the web browser,